thank you for that kind introduction. So maybe something else at 451 we can do. We can bottle this right and sell it. Who knows? So I'm William Fellows, VP Research, but I'm also a co-founder of the company. So it really is my privilege and honor to be here at the 10th annual Hosting and Cloud Transformation Summit. And I think this year in 2014, more than ever, the name reflects its billing, right? This industry is in transformation. So just look at who's in the audience, look at who's sitting next to you. We've got about 200 vendors, 140 service providers, 130 folks from financial services, we've got telcos, we've got enterprise end users. Clearly, the industry is converging on this opportunity from all points. And what you get from 451 Research is a perspective, you know, whether you're in sales, IT, biz dev, corporate strategy, marketing, there's going to be something here for you at this event. So, fueled by acquisitions and investments in innovation, I guess the bets have been placed now, right? So the suppliers are tooled up to deliver new generation IT services. But there remains a really sort of intractable and a difficult set of problems that we all here have to address. Because, you know, although enterprise adoption of cloud might be a fact at this point, the accelerated and ongoing adoption is really contingent on these problems being addressed. So what is the landscape here? So the demand for delivering IT at lower price points is growing, it's irreversible, right? And it's driven or underpinned by the experience of new generation IT services and principally cloud and new gen applications, and it's causing a lot of vast disruption in the industry. And while avoiding having to provision for peak capacity is always going to be a big ticket item for CIOs to take to their boards as they fight for budget, cloud is much more than a shift from CapEx to OpEx. You know, ultimately it leads to low cost and high volume architectures, and that's disrupting the market incumbents. And it also puts pressure on the market, both in terms of revenue and margin. And we've seen, well, companies are tearing themselves apart to try and address this. They're taking themselves, you know, out, they're putting themselves on the sideline to try and regroup. And I don't have to tell you, you know, who those companies are at this point. So secondly, technology. And I think consumer technology has set such a high bar that users' expectations about how to, you know, use technology in the workplace have sort of been raised dramatically. And I think the industry, everyone out there, is doing a really good job of, you know, meeting those needs. But it turns out that those users which are benefiting most are those which are transforming their businesses in order to be able to take advantage of cloud's usage-driven, consumption and usage-based model. Some of them are turning themselves from IT cost centers into service delivery organizations, but at this point, it is really a minority. And so it seems that really the gating factor and the bottleneck to increased adoption and growth is really about the ingestion of the technology into the business and less about the technology creation in of itself. You know, change management, business process management, being able to actually bring this stuff on board. So how did we get here? Martin referenced our report back in 2005. So Amazon pulled a rabbit out of the hat in 2006 with the launch of EC2 and S3. So where are we today? Well, that rabbit has a substantial lead in this marketplace at the moment. But it's interesting to note that Amazon's now selling, for example, storage at 1/100th of the price it was selling storage back in 2006. And that is a better than 6-fold price performance increase as predicted by Moore's Law. So clearly, change is accelerating. And I guess the question for the other runners who are trying to, keep up here is, how long Amazon can keep this up for. The question for us, of course, is, well, which of these runners has the legs to stay the course? Indeed, who's going to be relevant when it comes to the end? But perhaps more importantly, is anyone going to catch that rabbit? So, we already talked about there's a set of problems which need to be addressed that are really going to be the gating factors to growth and opportunity. And I think what we understand is that users are going to have a lot of ways to navigate their journeys here. Instead of having to go directly to a service provider, a cloud provider, there are going to be multiple ways, multiple things helping them to get there, both from an economic, an organization, and a technology point of view. And what you can see here in front of you is a kind of a work in progress market map of some of the sectors that we look at in our cloud and IT service markets channels. So we've got cloud technology service, we've got cloud financial services, we've got brokers and integration and so on. And I like to think about this really as it's kind of like a snakes and ladders board without the snakes, but using ladders to climb and find a way to a destination. And I think, it's worth calling out some of the innovators here, right? Because I'm saying here, who dares to be different? And that's the case. So if we think about, for example, RightScale, which has been an innovator in, cloud onboarding and management, and the range of imitators that it now has, I think demonstrates the opportunity there. We've got companies like Cognizant who are creating an independent unit that's only focused on selling pay-as-you-go services to its customers and clients. A very different model from what it's been used to. Capgemini has partnered with small software shop Gravitant to offer users a way to choose and select different kinds of services. We've got Dell, which has taken itself out of the public market and out of cloud delivery, but is now fully tooled up to help organizations build and deliver cloud. We've got Dimension Data, which is an interesting proof point of a company which is building an ecosystem, a marketplace with its one cloud and also a white label offering. We've got this range of cloud cost and spend management and optimization firms. Too numerous to mention, but they all feature in the research, and I guess half a dozen of them have been bought so far. There's clearly a need for this stuff. Outliers like Ericsson, which has bought Apsera, Metrotech, invested in Safeguard, and clearly they're poised to try and bring their expertise in delivering real-time dynamic communication services, doing the same thing to cloud. And a tip of the hat, I suppose, to the exchanges and marketplaces and so on for reigniting or bringing into view the conversation around innovation in economics and putting, the question out front, well, are CIOs at some point going to be able to hedge for their IT like they hedge their fuel costs? So how do we think about cloud at 451? So in the cloud market, we've got, first of all, cloud computing. So we have about 350 vendors under coverage who are delivering infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software infrastructure as a service, which is some of the supporting glue, I suppose. And then we have our cloud enabling technologies, and this is all software, virtualization, automation, and management, the things that you would typically license on premise to go build and deliver cloud service. And you can see from this chart that the cloud enabling technology market is going to remain bigger than the as a service market until about 2015. If we drill down just a little more into the cloud as a service market, we can see that infrastructure as a service is the majority of that market, which is about evenly divided between compute and storage. Amazon has a commanding lead at this point, but while I've been on this stage before talking about, Amazon being Coke, there's no Pepsi, well, in fact, there are some material colas on the market now. But nevertheless, Amazon's still providing this rising tide that's floating all boats. And an interesting, observation here is that Amazon's revenue is at least 1.1 times the aggregate total revenue of the other 166 companies that we have under coverage in infrastructure as a service, just to give you a sense of what the headroom is here. But let's put it into context of the overall hosting market, and we can see here, if we look at the 2014 numbers, for example, and add up managed hosting, shared hosting, dedicated hosting, that market is at least 7 times as big as infrastructure as a service at the moment. And if, for argument's sake, we say Amazon has, let's say, 50% of this IaaS market at $3 billion, you know, there are organizations on this planet whose IT procurement cycles are, you know, as valuable as that. But make no mistake, you know, if it's not very meaningful in terms of revenue, it's extremely important in terms of leadership. You know, it's nibbling at the edges but having this profound effect. The cloud share of this market is growing, and it's going to touch more sort of the IT spend. And I think these service providers clearly understand this is not a zero-sum game. All of these markets are growing, and where they were first fearful of introducing cloud because they thought it might cannibalize other services, it turns out that in fact for every dollar spent on cloud services, there's an incremental opportunity to sell other higher value services to those customers. You know, because, you know, make no mistake, if you don't sell cloud to those customers, then Amazon or someone else is going to be doing it. But, you know, the costs of participation are high, and that's why there are so few organizations building these things at the moment. And I guess a lot of folks out there looking to decide whether, you know, they can borrow, whether they can partner to acquire these kinds of capabilities. You know, there's been this kind of Cambrian explosion, I suppose, of services out there. But at the moment, you know, if you don't have a cloud, you're not playing. So let's just take a minute to see where these folks are relatively. So the global mass market IaaS specialists, they kind of think they're going to inherit the earth, right? They're hyperscale, driven by price, self-service, and so on. The telcos, on the other hand, well, you know, they're trying to understand whether they can actually reclaim their birthright. But they do have, you know, a model based on monthly recurring revenue. They've exported that, and it's consumption-based. So they're kind of in the frame. The regional providers have had this advantage with local sort of cultural affiliation, affinity, and sort of broad language support in different areas. Hosters and MSPs, mass market moving up to higher value services. Enterprise technology vendors that have been selling you a platform and a stack, and increasingly a kind of a Me Too IaaS service. And then we have the systems integrators and outsourcers, who I guess think that, you know, they are the rightful heirs to this market, who are bringing kind of blended offerings together. And more recently, data center and colo folks who are sort of foregrounding the benefits of being inside their walls, of using their fast interconnection hubs and so on. Hunky-dory. But what are the challenges? So I think for the global mass market specialists, so they've got to grow their margin when this market's sort of commoditizing, but more importantly, A, they've got to address the enterprise with an engagement model, and B, they need to bond to networks. The telcos and service NSPs, they already have the network, but they're struggling to move beyond, you know, this sort of connectivity, their declining legacy revenues, and so on. Regional providers have got to continue to have those relationships while the global players move in. And hosters and MSPs are getting squeezed from the bottom and needing to add value elsewhere. Enterprise technology vendors have been used to selling boxes, licenses. This market is about consumption. You know, that's the hard lesson that they're learning. And again, they need to bond to networks as well. And I guess we've seen, you know, just recently some examples of that happening in the marketplace. So the integrators and outsourcers, and we thought, you know, at first they were literally going to be marginalized by cloud's price point, when actually, in fact, it turns out that most organizations need, you know, third-party trusted advisors, folks who can do this kind of difficult integration. But the deals are smaller, so they need more of them. They're moving to asset-light models because they don't want to compete with, you know, Amazon and Microsoft and Google. And the margins in their market are poor, should we say. The data center and colo folks simply need to build momentum around their offerings, and I think they also need sort of recognition in the enterprise, which they don't really have at the moment. So what are these things that need to be solved? We said it was, the opportunity to contingent on addressing some of these issues. And, although it's across, economics and technology and organisation, I wanted us to drill down into a few things. And when we interrogate our enterprise commentator network to ask them what are the pain points, you can see here they're arranged across that spectrum. So security, pricing, budget and cost, human change management, data locality and sovereignty, compliance, migration, and so on. So let's take just a quick look at some of these. And I know some of you are taking photos. These slides will be available as of tomorrow morning from the website. So first of all, security, what's real and perceived out there. There's certainly, when it comes to security and privacy, there's a certain amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt has been played by the market in terms of, what Snowden, the NSA, PRISM, and the Patriot Act mean for end users. And certainly it's become a global competitive marketing device with, jurisdiction shopping and so on. But make no mistake, jurisdiction is the single most asked question of our enterprise security team. What are the legal implications of me having a data center in location X? Can I use other people's servers? I can't move stuff out of my organization. Then we have the Dropbox problem writ large, right? So sync is the new save and the kind of data leakage that goes along with that. And I think the range of offerings that are in the market really, shows how this is, a need that is completely, founded out there. And I think the early disruptors have really only kind of exposed the magnitude of the opportunity. We think it needs to be baked in, not added as an afterthought or an add-on. So when it comes to cost, I think there's a couple of things. What we're talking about is the cost of insertion into the marketplace and then the price that you pay. And that can be both from a supplier point of view and an end user point of view. And one of the things that we're doing an organisation is trying to untangle some of that complexity. And last year we published our Cloud Pricing Codex as a guide for understanding the different mechanisms available. And we'll be talking about this later in the event and how we're extending that to a cloud price index, which is similar to the consumer price index for a basket of goods. So, folks want to understand what the costs are. There are not great tools out there. But, more importantly, even if the CIO, right, has a way to invoice the line of business for the IT they use, is the line of business set up to consume services in that way? And, I think really a lot of them are still stuck in a world where they're dealing with, on-premise licenses, budgeted, allocated resources, and ownership. So the thorny problem of automation, integration, orchestration, management, all of that hairball. I mean, one of the things we might want to ask ourselves is, well, what do enterprises have at the moment? And when we talk to our enterprise end users, they might not say, I've got 3.5 clouds, but if you look at it, they might possibly, right? They've got VMware estates with some kind of automation, heading towards a kind of a private cloud journey. They've typically got some AWS use in the organization, and they get Microsoft Azure as part of their Microsoft Enterprise license, whether they use it or not. And most of them now are at least trying to understand what the benefits or opportunity might be around OpenStack. That's kind of 3.5 by my count. Anyway, I think that the opportunity for suppliers is for, management platforms that can operate across all of these. Integrate with the old, bring the new container view, cost visibility, and with sort of decision and transformation engine capabilities. So Shadow IT nicely highlights the tension between control and agility. And, if we think that as much as half of tech spending by the business is not controlled by IT, it's a big deal, right? It makes organizations look dysfunctional. The tricky thing here is going to be allowing, a way for to retain the agility and self-service, the reason you went to cloud in the first place, at the same time as allowing IT to have control. But really, this one's a thorny one. So turning technology into service delivery, we've talked about this sort of IT as a service future. I think we're really talking about, taking technology inputs and turning them into business outcomes. Katie Ring on my team is going to be talking about this later. But, you know, it's a way of balancing these competing needs and also becoming a sort of a service broker internally to the organization. So we've also developed this maturity model to help organizations and the industry understand, you know, where users are in terms of this journey that they are undertaking. It's a kind of a six-stage thing, and we can see here that most users are still at the stage of virtualization and automation, taking this virtualization and automating it to make it self-service, flexible, and so on. And less than a fifth have actually got something which you know, resembles a private cloud at this point, which is probably a number, you know, that is a bit different to what you hear from, you know, other kitchen sink estimates out there in the market. And indeed, when we ask them what are the roadblocks to moving to those next stages in the maturity model, well, it turns out that actually it's not IT at all. It's, you know, the things that are holding them up are really around organisational things: people, time, organisation and budget, resistance to change. Clearly there are technology issues here, legacy integration, automation, and so on. But I think this speaks volumes about where we are and what needs to be done. In the marketplace, there are issues for end users. There's lots of vendors. It's pretty confusing. They need to pick the right partner. They want to move from pilot to production. How do they do this? They're looking for trusted partners, right? Which is you folks in the audience. Then the question is, well, is the cloud commoditizing? You know, competitors are copying each other, virtual machines, if only because of other layers of abstraction that have been invented by this industry, are becoming more fungible. And all that price cutting and consumer opinion tends to think, it's becoming a commodity. So we certainly think that the price is heading down and that things are becoming more commodity, but it applies to products and not to the providers themselves. And, you know, it's worth remembering that the declining service gross margin doesn't necessarily mean declining net profit. But what we're not talking about here is corn, right? So, you know, users at this point aren't moving applications and workloads between different providers and clouds based upon minute by minute or penny by penny changes in price. Applications and workloads have complicated information architectures and data payloads which have very specific network storage and compute dependencies. So clearly we're not there yet. However, the service delivery models, well, they are, you know, coming together. Users want to make rational decisions about where to put workloads and applications and source services based upon the workload characteristic, SLA, policy, and so on. And as cloud and hosting and managed services converge, those opportunities are sort of growing exponentially. And we think that the use of best execution venue strategies can help organizations select the right service to meet their needs. Now, sophisticated IT organizations might be able to maintain multiple relationships, but we think even those with, you know, complex contract negotiation expertise are going to have trouble when it comes to cloud because of the diversity and the range of mechanisms available to them, different pricing and so on. And indeed, most organizations don't have access to more than a handful of services like you and me might do as consumers of utilities. And where we do, they're kind of operated in a bilateral way, which is why we think there's going to be an opportunity in the market for all kinds of suppliers to help users find and use alternative venues, whether that's brokers, integrators, business marketplaces, financial or technology services, because, as we said, some workloads and applications are more suited to public environments, some more to a dedicated environment, some perhaps to on-premise. And they're going to need help with other kinds of services to make all of that work. So what are the opportunities for the service providers out there? So we asked our enterprise commentators, if you could design the ideal cloud implementation, what would it be? And these are the results. And what we've done here is in the green to identify services based upon those responses which can offer a kind of a longer term differentiation, less churn, more stable gross margins, a kind of a leadership opportunity. And in the red, services around those responses which offer perhaps a more short-term differentiation and lead, where there's going to be higher churn and shrinking gross margin. So at the top there we have security in the green as a key opportunity for value, followed by services maybe that are based on cost, ease of use, stability, flexibility, performance, scalable. And then we have management, data, migration. In other words, we're trying to understand, for this audience, trying to bring into view some of the opportunities, where we think there are to add value. And the single most asked question of our team by this industry is, well, how can I be not Amazon? And I think it's pretty clear the organising principle here and some of the things which, customers are willing to pay for, whether it's security or support. They want different kinds of tenant options, risk profiles. One trick that might be missing is to take an IBM Redbook approach, to roll up, an understanding of how services could be positioned, value guidance, implementation scenarios. These are things which users have said could be useful for them. And you don't have to take it from me. Take it from enterprise end users themselves. Martin earlier on referred to our Enterprise 451 Executive Summit. So we organise these across those channels, a couple a year, 50 end users in a room, and these are the recommendations that they come up with for their peers. Avoid lock-in, go when you're in the driver's seat. Dropbox is an issue. Runaway costs are a feel. I think the one thing that resonated a lot was the lack of engagement, enterprise engagement model that suppliers and service providers have. Just speaking the same language, and really the inner workings of service are kind of less important. Ultimately, end users clearly want to have the cloud their way. So I think what I've said over the last few minutes, really, I think we have to think about this as not being the same old promise from the tech sector that everything's going to change everything. And really, change, I think, is accelerating, as we've kind of demonstrated here, and principally, because IT is becoming an engine of monetization, everyone's revving their engines to try and take advantage of this. The good news is that as far as we can tell, raw capacity consumption is about doubling every year, and yet IT budgets have remained essentially flat over the last decade. The opportunity is for the service providers to square that circle, if you like. The bottleneck, of course, is that this is going to take time to happen. But anything that can help address that ingestion issue is going to help accelerate the market, because for many organizations, sort of culture eats strategy for breakfast. There has to be a way to overcome some of that. And we think that companies who can sort this out first are likely to have a substantial advantage when it comes to customer acquisition, which is really the goal, right? So I wanted to sign off just by introducing you to my cloud and IT service markets team. So I have in the house the two doctors, and they'll both be speaking, holding sessions here. Katie Ring and Owen Rogers, who looks after our digital economics unit. Rory and Penny look after the European research, and Agatha looks after our global computing. And for further reading, so just on Friday we published our report into cloud broking, making IT as a service a practical reality, which discusses in some detail some of the things from that market map that I showed you and what the opportunity is. So, thanks very much for your time, and actually it's my great pleasure now to introduce to the stage Marco Lameno, who is Vice President of Hosting and Service Providers Business at Microsoft. Marco.